An extraordinary interview now with a remarkable woman, Under Secretary General for Global Communications at the United Nations. She is an advocate of embracing the human stories within the refugee crisis. Some of the highlights of her career include Radio Free Europe, the UN Nuclear Watchdog, and UN Refugees Agency, to name a few. It's a great honour to have her with us for Peace Day Live 2021. Please welcome Melissa Fleming. And our interviewer today is Jeremy Gilley, founder of Peace One Day, producer and director of Peace Day Live.
Thank you, Sasha. Welcome, Melissa.
Great to be with you, Jeremy, and to be part of Peace One Day.
So Melissa Fleming, ladies and gentlemen, Under Secretary General for Global Communications at the United Nations. Welcome to Peace Day Live, the 21st of September, 2021. The first question I'd like to ask you, Melissa, is how does your impressive profile feed into your current role as head of the UN's Global Communications?
Well, Jeremy, first of all, thanks for saying I have an impressive profile, but I think it's a rich background in working in different parts of the UN, the humanitarian part, working also on nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear safety, human rights. So pulling all of this in, having much experience traveling around the world to visit war zones and refugee camps and to really witness human suffering at its worst, and the vital role of the United Nations in protecting people, keeping people alive, feeding people, and trying to mediate to stop the wars that are causing so much destruction, so much terror, and so much suffering. So I bring this to this new job in New York. It's not new anymore, actually. This is my second year in this job, but there's nothing more well, I would say you cannot have a United Nations that represents the values and the work that it has and does without being able to communicate them effectively, because otherwise they're just not going to be known.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations in the work that you've been doing for the last few years. In the context of Goal 16, peace and justice, how important is a day of peace in terms of engaging the global community, and why?
Well, Jeremy, I've always admired you for your just keeping this going year after year after year, especially at a time when people have been turning inward, facing the COVID-19 crisis, worrying about their own survival in many cases. We don't see as many movements for peace as would be needed among civil society, among the general population. And I think just taking this day and popularizing it as you do to remind people that peace is just so fundamental to the well-being of our world and for all of us, and that we can't just think that somebody else is going to take care of it. We need the voices of the world populace to insist on peace, to insist on leadership, focusing more on forging peace. There are too many ongoing conflicts that have been festering for years and years. So taking this one day out, bringing this focus with all the important voices, I think puts something into people's hearts and minds, and reminds them that they also have a voice, and that's really important.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So you've been immensely supportive in agreeing to join us for today's show. How important are small civil society organizations like Peace One Day in helping the United Nations engage people around the world?
Well, I believe we absolutely, and I know the Secretary General believes this as well. We cannot solve the world's problems alone. We might have created the blueprint in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but then we need civil society organizations like yours, and the many hundreds and thousands affiliated with the United Nations globally and in the countries in which we serve, to be advocates for these goals, to be on the ground as activists, as calling governments to account, in rallying populations to stand up for the values that are embraced in the UN Charter and in the blueprint, the to-do list, as it's being called at this General Assembly, for the world to make it better. So without civil society organizations and actors, we absolutely would be powerless. I think you're really an extension of the values and the blueprint for making this world a better place.
Wow. The experts tell us, Melissa, and of course it'll be on your mind as much as it is on mine, and indeed many of the audience, that the world is at a critical turning point with global warming, the coronavirus pandemic, cyber terrorism. What do you see as the role of the United Nations in humanity's survival?
Well, the Secretary General just addressed the General Assembly this morning, and if any of you have a chance to just go and look at his speech or go to his Twitter, and you'll see what he's saying. It's probably the strongest speech that I have heard coming out of his mouth, warning the world that we're really on the brink of catastrophe in so many fronts. For one, when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we're still at this point where the rich countries of the world have a way out. They have ample portions of vaccines. In fact, vaccines that are about to expire by the hundreds of thousands on their shelves, and then the vast majority of the world having almost none. When you look at Africa, 2% of the African population has had access to vaccines. This must stop. We're calling on a complete doubling of production, a global vaccination plan, access to 70% of the population of the world in 2022. This has to be, if we're ever going to get out of this pandemic, and all of us want to, this has to be all of our priority. Because it also has so many consequences in so many dimensions, including in stability and in security. And at the same time, we're not on the best track on climate action. And you'll hear the Secretary General really warning that if especially the major emitting countries do not commit to reduction, in meaningful reduction, in the next coming months, we are set up for just a terrible disaster in terms of the effects of climate change. We also are calling on the countries that have committed to help poorer or lower income countries to overcome it, to prepare themselves to deal with the effects of climate change that are happening now in real time. So we have, we know how to solve these problems, but it seems that the world is not uniting in the way it should. You asked what the United Nations can do. Well, the United Nations stands for multilateralism. It is the gathering place. We're at the General Assembly right now. 100 heads of state have come to New York to be here in person because they know this is the forum where they can not just talk about their national interests, but they can talk about how we're going to solve the world's problems together, because they must, because they're being called upon to do so. So yes, the UN can gather the leadership of the world, and it also can alleviate the suffering in places where things have really broken down.
Thank you, Melissa. Very serious situation, and as well as governments, each individual has a crucial role to play, don't they? And I hope that today's broadcast will inform, inspire and engage many people to take action, as I know you would want as well, Melissa.
And Jeremy, I just wanted to also mention, of course, what peace and security is first and foremost in the minds of the UN. Just taking Afghanistan, when everybody was leaving Afghanistan, evacuating. All the television cameras were pointing to the planes leaving, the crowds of people wanting to get out. It was the United Nations that stayed, and we will continue to stay. We will continue to stay and deliver to alleviate the suffering of Afghan people, to make sure people don't go hungry, but also to fight for their rights, to insist that girls and women can access school. So, we stand for and we represent the principles of the world, but we also are there side by side with the people on the ground when everybody else has left them.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, over the last 22 years, I've had the good privilege, as you know, of traveling with you and your teams. And I know that you're there firsthand. I've seen it myself, and it's incredibly inspiring. And, for me, the United Nations is the closest organization we have to holding the world together. And I just always want to support the incredible work that you all do. But on that point of you being there still in Afghanistan, there are many in the world who support and applaud the United Nations, but there are also critics. When you hear those criticisms, what would you like people to understand?
Well, I think it depends on what the critics are criticizing. Some critics, rightly so, criticize the Security Council for not coming together and making the decisions that could end festering conflicts. We would say, perhaps keep up that criticism, because we really do need multilateral unity in order to come together and solve problems that can only be achieved at the political level. I do ask critics to look to the UN, especially the humanitarian side of the UN, the human rights advocacy side of the UN, and to really have a look, travel like you did, Jeremy, to places in the world where there is displacement, where there is hunger, where there is almost nothing that the state is providing to its population. And these people would die if United Nations humanitarian workers were not there to serve them.
Yeah. Incredible. As I said, I've seen it firsthand. It's amazing. So we've got a couple of minutes left, but I can't end this interview with the incredible book and talking about it for just a second. So following some of the stories that you've witnessed while you were working for the High Commissioner for Refugees, traveling the world, you wrote a book called A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea. What a beautiful title. What's your vision in relation to this book, and what do you hope it achieves?
Well, what I've learned as a communicator is that stories of mass suffering have one effect, and that is psychic numbing. People just cannot, and behavioral scientists have told us that this is the case. They want to care, but it's really, really hard to care about thousands or millions of people. So a mechanism to get to the hearts of people, and on behalf of all of the refugees in the world, is to tell human stories, individual human stories. And the story that really got me in all of the stories that I heard from the amazing refugees I met at my 10 years at UNHCR, but there was one that really struck me, and that's what I wrote the book about. And I'll just really briefly tell you, it's about a young Syrian refugee woman named Doa. She was 19 years old at the time, when she took a boat across the Mediterranean Sea with her fiance, the love of her life, and 500 fellow refugee passengers. Long story short, the boat was rammed, it sunk, and she was one of the only 11 survivors. And when she was rescued after 4 days and 4 nights on the Mediterranean Sea, floating on a little child's ring, she carrying 2 babies on her chest, not her own. They had been entrusted to her by parents and grandparents, and one of those babies pulled through. So Doa's story is a story of the Syrian war, the refugee experience, the striving for a better life, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And I have to say, it's been published in I think about 15 languages. It's optioned to be turned into a Hollywood film. So it really has captured people's imagination, and it has validated my communications approach, which is tell human stories. Statistics are human beings with the tears dried off, as someone said. That quote is always in my mind. We need to build that bridge of empathy to the public through human storytelling.
Wow. Well, Melissa Fleming, Undersecretary General for Global Communications, please keep telling us stories. Keep informing us, inspiring us, and engaging us to action. Thank you. Have a great day in New York.
Thank you, Jeremy. And please, to you, continue to pull the world together and inspire people to commit to peace.
I will. I'll do my best.